If you grew up as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, you probably remember being told that Jehovah's standards never change. The world might change, society might change, and other religions might compromise. But the truth, you were assured, would remain the same. And yet some practices that once defined everyday life as a Jehovah's Witness are now quietly disappearing. These were not insignificant customs. They influenced whether someone was considered spiritual, qualified for privileges, could acknowledge a former member, and even which medical treatments a witness could accept. Today, some of these practices are being described as personal decisions. Others have been reduced, renamed, or pushed into the background. The organization calls these developments clarifications or adjustments, but for many former witnesses, they raise an uncomfortable question. If these rules could be changed, why were people judged or punished for questioning them before? In this video, we will examine 5 Jehovah's Witness traditions quietly disappearing in 2026 and why these changes matter to those who lived under the previous rules. Before we begin, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps us continue producing carefully researched videos about the history, policies, and ongoing changes inside the organization. Let's begin. Number 1. Complete silence toward disfellowshipped people for generations. Jehovah's Witnesses were taught that a disfellowshipped person should not even be greeted. A person could enter the kingdom hall where he had grown up, sit near people who had known him since childhood, and still be treated as if he were invisible. Friends might look away. People who once called him a spiritual brother could leave without saying a single word. For years, witnesses were told that this behavior was required by the Bible. 2 John verses 10 and 11 were used to support the idea that even offering a greeting could make someone a participant in the expelled person's wrongdoing. Then, in 2024, the interpretation changed. The governing body explained that the warning in 2 John specifically concerned apostates and people actively promoting wrongdoing. It did not necessarily apply in the same way to every person removed from the congregation. Witnesses could now use their Bible-trained conscience to offer a simple greeting to a removed person attending a congregation meeting. They could also invite certain removed individuals to attend. Even the terminology changed. The organization announced that it would no longer normally describe these people as disfellowshipped. The preferred expression became removed from the congregation. The wider shunning policy has not disappeared. Witnesses are still instructed not to socialize or eat with a removed person, and the adjustment does not apply to people considered apostates. But the old tradition of absolute silence inside the kingdom hall has been weakened. For active witnesses, this may appear to be a compassionate adjustment. For former members, however, it raises a painful question. If a simple greeting is acceptable today, why was it considered spiritually dangerous before? How many people entered a meeting hoping for one small sign of humanity, but were met with silence? How many parents ignored their own children because they believed that saying hello would displease Jehovah? The organization presents this as a clearer understanding of Scripture, but the verses did not change. What changed was the governing body's interpretation. The adjustment also appeared while the organization was facing increasing legal scrutiny over shunning in countries such as Norway. The organization does not say that legal pressure caused the change, so that cannot be stated as fact. But the timing understandably caused critics to question whether the motivation was purely spiritual. Whatever the reason, the complete refusal to greet every expelled person is no longer as absolute as it once was. Number 2. The traditional Jehovah's Witness appearance. For decades, you could often identify Jehovah's Witnesses before they introduced themselves. The men were clean-shaven and dressed in suits and ties. The women wore dresses or skirts, especially at meetings, conventions, and in the preaching work. These standards were not always written as direct biblical laws, but within the organization they carried enormous weight. A brother with a beard could be considered rebellious, worldly, or spiritually weak. In many congregations, he would not qualify to carry microphones, give talks, become a ministerial servant, or serve as an elder. This was especially strange considering that Jesus, the apostles, and other biblical men were regularly shown with beards in Watchtower illustrations. Even Charles Taze Russell had a large and recognizable beard, yet being clean-shaven became an unofficial symbol of obedience. Then, in December 2023, the governing body announced that wearing a beard was a personal decision. The explanation acknowledged that the scriptures do not condemn beards. Almost immediately, brothers around the world began growing facial hair. That reaction revealed something important. Millions of adult men had not been freely choosing to shave. Many had been waiting for permission. A few months later, sisters were permitted to wear dignified slacks during meetings, conventions, and field service. Brothers could choose not to wear a jacket or tie in many of the same situations, although formal clothing was still expected for certain assignments. By 2026, the visual identity that distinguished Jehovah's Witnesses for generations is fading. There is nothing wrong with allowing people greater freedom. The problem is how the previous standards were enforced. If the Bible never prohibited beards, why were bearded brothers denied privileges? If modest pants are acceptable now, why were sisters previously made to feel that wearing them was inappropriate? Once again, the Bible did not change. The organizational culture did. The traditional Jehovah's Witness uniform is disappearing, but the memories of those judged under the old standards remain. Number 3. Printed Watchtower magazines. There was a time when it was almost impossible to imagine Jehovah's Witnesses without printed magazines. Publishers carried field service bags filled with the Watchtower and Awake. Children memorized magazine presentations. Witnesses stood on street corners holding the latest issues where everyone could see them. Distributing magazines was not merely a preaching method, it was part of the organization's identity. Placements were recorded, congregations celebrated impressive distribution numbers, and enormous printing facilities were presented as evidence of Jehovah's blessing. Older witnesses remember receiving multiple new issues every month and accumulating personal libraries filled with bound volumes and older publications. But that world has almost vanished. Over time, the public editions became shorter and less frequent. Awake went from being published twice a month to monthly, then every 2 months, then only a few times each year. By 2025 and 2026, the public magazine schedule had been reduced to only one new numbered issue per year. A similar reduction occurred with the public edition of the Watchtower. The organization still prints literature, and the study edition of the Watchtower remains important in congregation meetings. But the culture built around constantly distributing new public magazines is clearly disappearing. In its place, publishers increasingly direct people to jw.org, show videos on mobile devices, send links, and use the JW Library application. Even literature carts often function more like advertisements for the website. There are practical reasons for this. Digital material is cheaper, easier to distribute, and can be made available instantly in hundreds of languages. But the transformation has another consequence. A printed magazine can remain in someone's home for 50 years. A digital article can be edited, replaced, or become difficult to locate. This matters in an organization with a long history of doctrinal adjustments. Printed publications preserve exactly what was presented as truth at a particular moment. They create a historical record that cannot easily be altered. The famous image of publishers carrying heavy bags filled with magazines is becoming a memory. In 2026, the smartphone has largely replaced the field service bag. Number 4. Reporting exact preaching hours. For decades, one question followed every active Jehovah's Witness at the end of the month. Have you turned in your field service report? Publishers recorded the number of hours they spent preaching. During different periods, they also reported books, magazines, return visits, and Bible studies. Officially, the report measured activity. In practice, it often became a measurement of spirituality. Brothers considered for appointment as ministerial servants or elders were expected to have respectable field service records. Someone reporting very few hours could receive counsel. A person who stopped reporting could eventually be classified as inactive. This created enormous pressure. Some witnesses carefully calculated travel time or wondered whether a short conversation qualified as preaching. Others went into field service near the end of the month primarily because their report was too low. The public message was that ministry came from love. But every month, that love was converted into a number and placed on a congregation record. Then, at the 2023 annual meeting, the organization announced that ordinary publishers would no longer report the exact number of hours they preached. Beginning in November 2023, most publishers simply indicated whether they had participated in some form of ministry and reported the number of Bible studies they conducted. Pioneers and others with specific hourly requirements continued reporting time. But for millions of ordinary witnesses, the detailed hour report disappeared. The organization insisted this did not make the ministry less important. Nevertheless, it removed one of the most influential measurements used in congregation life. The first-century Christians did not submit monthly field service slips. The apostles did not determine whether a man was qualified to shepherd a congregation by examining his monthly average. If exact reporting was unnecessary, why did it influence privileges and reputations for so long? Some witnesses sacrificed rest, family time, and health to keep their numbers high. Pioneers felt ashamed when illness or financial problems prevented them from reaching their target. Now, for most publishers, a simple confirmation of participation is enough. The stopwatch may be gone, but the emotional consequences of being measured by it remain. Number 5. Storing and reusing your own blood. The final change is the most serious because it involves medical decisions that can determine whether someone lives or dies. Jehovah's Witnesses have rejected blood transfusions since the 1940s. The organization interprets the command to abstain from blood as applying not only to eating blood, but also to receiving it medically. That central prohibition has not disappeared. Witnesses are still expected to refuse transfusions of donated whole blood and its 4 main components: red cells, white cells, platelets, and plasma. However, another long-standing restriction changed in March 2026. For decades, witnesses were taught that they could not have their own blood removed, stored, and later returned to their body. The explanation was that blood removed from the body should be poured out rather than stored. A Watchtower article published in 2000 stated that collecting, storing, and transfusing a patient's own blood directly contradicted the biblical direction found in Leviticus and Deuteronomy. This was not presented as an optional preference. It was presented as a religious restriction. Then, on March 20, 2026, governing body member Garrett Lush announced a new clarification. Each Christian could now decide personally how his own blood would be used in medical and surgical care. That included deciding whether to allow the blood to be removed, stored, and later given back. A procedure previously rejected on biblical grounds had become a matter of personal conscience. From a medical perspective, this could expand treatment options for witness patients undergoing planned surgeries. Any change that gives patients more options should be welcomed, but the historical and ethical questions cannot be ignored. If the Bible previously showed that stored blood had to be poured out, how can the same Bible now allow an individual to store it? What happened to patients who refused this procedure because they believed accepting it would violate God's law? How many families made irreversible decisions based on an interpretation that is no longer enforced? The governing body calls this a clarification. But changing a medical procedure from religiously unacceptable to a personal choice is more than explaining an old teaching more clearly. For the person lying in a hospital bed, the difference can be enormous. When an organizational adjustment concerns clothing, members can change their wardrobe. When it concerns a monthly report, they can stop counting hours. But when it concerns medical treatment, the consequences of the previous policy cannot always be reversed. The broader prohibition on donated blood remains. But one restriction that shaped Jehovah's Witness medical decisions for decades has quietly disappeared in 2026. These developments reveal a clear pattern. Complete silence toward every removed person has been softened. The traditional clean-shaven suit and skirt appearance is fading. Printed public magazines have been dramatically reduced. Ordinary publishers no longer report exact preaching hours. And storing and reusing a patient's own blood has become a personal decision. Some active witnesses will view these adjustments as evidence that the organization is becoming more compassionate. Former members may see something very different. They remember when these practices were treated as evidence of loyalty. They remember being told not to question and that disagreement could be interpreted as rebellion or lack of faith. The problem is not simply that policies change. Every institution changes. The problem is demanding unquestioning obedience today, while accepting no responsibility when today's command becomes tomorrow's outdated interpretation. If a beard can become a personal decision, perhaps it should always have been one. If greeting a removed person can be left to conscience, perhaps compassion should never have required permission. And if storing your own blood can now be accepted, the organization owes more than a brief announcement to those who faced the previous prohibition. Which of these changes surprised you most? And what Jehovah's Witness tradition do you believe will disappear next? Share your thoughts in the comments. And for more carefully researched videos about changes inside the Watchtower organization, like this video and subscribe to the channel.